Evolutionary.org 585 coming your way. This one we're going to do a fun one. It's going to be a listener's feedback and comments. We're going to try to stick to the most funny or negative comments that we've gotten. And we're also going to stick to the most controversial ones that we've gotten. But this is going to be a fun one for the most part. But first, Mobster, we're going to start with the one that you didn't get a chance to reply to. And it was the one that we did. I'm going to let you explain. I want you to jump in and explain what happened there.
Yeah, funny enough, Steve, I'm looking at my own. I did reply, but I'm not sure that the person had made the comment, came back and read my reply. So this was the Ric Drasin death and steroid cycle. And for those of you who don't know, Ric was a wrestler, a bodybuilder, and a designer of the original version on a napkin at a restaurant, I believe, of the Gold's Gym motif. The weightlifting fellow with no hair on his head was designed by Ric. He also designed a bunch of other T-shirts and stuff as well, Steve. I think he might have even been involved in the World's Gym logo, but certainly the Gold's Gym logo. Now, for some years prior to his death, he'd been doing podcasts, videos, blogs on YouTube, like we're doing right now. And he'd had famous bodybuilders of yesterday from the Golden Age and a few more of the modern ones as well, Steve. And he was very, very good. So when he passed away, we actually did, and I've got to be honest, I will say that the title was a little tiny bit clickbait-ish, okay? And this is what I think was the issue. So we covered the fact that he was a great artist, a fantastic bodybuilder, that he lived and participated at the time when Arnold was kicking ass in the 70s and being part of that group. And I actually put the comment, which I included in my response, that we called him an everyman. And an everyman is someone who's kind of really good, if not amazing, at certain things he was involved in as a writer, as someone doing videos, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, he passed away. So the comment was, you guys estimate, infer from other possible comments. Did Ric ever say anything to e-review anything regarding what he took, if he took? No. Talk about sensationalizing and taking advantage after someone died. Did you get any more listeners or subscribers from this? My cousin may not have been perfect, but you guys are the scourge of the earth. Wish Ric was here to respond. So here's my reply, and I'll address this again. Hi, Patty. According to one of the replies above, Ric actually discussed his use and the amounts on one of his own podcast videos. His own and others are around him at the time when they competed. For example, Steve, I believe he did one about Arnold, and we've discussed the Arnold stack cycles. It is also very common amongst pros not to discuss what they were taking because they don't want to encourage others. Pros tend to be driven obsessive, sorry. If you listen to the podcast, I actually say a lot of very nice things about Ric, including he was very much an everyman, as I just referred to. At best, the title was to grab views, but we did, I feel, a great job in the actual podcast. Have a listen and tell us what you think. Now, it's his cousin. He hasn't been dead that long, and she's seen or someone's directed her to the video, and just, in my opinion, Steve, seen the title. And the title says Ric Drasin Death and Steroid Cycles. So when you've lost a cousin that you might have been close to, and this title, which is not really that bad either way, might feel a little bit off to you, a bit discolourful. I've talked about this before, Steve. If you win the lottery or you become famous, some arsehole's going to come out and sell their story to the newspapers about that one time in the 1970s that he was a dick. Okay, so this might feel to her, his cousin, that this is what we're doing. If she'd actually listened to the show, we talked about his history, his involvement, to the fact that he was, if he did nothing else, Steve, he's designed the thing for Gold's Gym that is practically fucking iconic. I can tell you, and I'll make this the last point on this particular comment, that at one point, and I think Ric actually addressed this in one of his shows, they were selling something like $100,000 a day of the Gold's Gym T-shirts. You saw it on magazine covers that weren't bodybuilding. Famous film stars and singers and stuff would go to Gold's Gym and be seen wearing the Gold's Gym T-shirt. That, if nothing else, and there are other things, if nothing else, is the impact that Ric had. Did Ric use steroids? Yes. Did he discuss the steroid stack? Yes, but we addressed that and other things. And in fact, I even said that the sport was lost for having had him pass. We lost a personality and an everyman from the sport. So I think it was very much an emotional response. And I wish he'd listened to the show. And even if her takeaway was the steroid stack, that wasn't just what we spoke about, Steve. There was a bunch of other things. Pick up the next one for us.
All right, so let's move on. And this one was on episode 317, and it was fasting and steroids for cutting. This was from Kark Kimmark Kanat 2109. He says, no steroids for cutting were mentioned, ? Misleading tile. And he put a mean looking smiley face. So look, on this one, we discuss steroids on this podcast, guys. Every podcast, pretty much, we just discuss steroids. So I'm really not sure what you're complaining about on this one. And we, I don't, this one is, I don't understand you guys,
I don't know. We would have absolutely discussed EQ or Winstrol or any of the cutting ones. We've done a bunch of podcasts where we've specifically talked about one steroid. But unless I go back and listen to it, Steve, I can't think that listen, the bosses wouldn't have put that video online if we hadn't covered the topic that was in the title. And that's without me remembering that podcast. See, so I don't know what's going on there. Is he just trying to be misdirected? Is he listened to something else and then commented in the wrong place?
I think he listened to like 10 minutes of it. Or something.
Maybe we talked about nutrition and training and how important that was, and he didn't have the time to sit and listen to us discuss specific steroids. But we absolutely. Let me give you another one. This is 374 steroids for new users: Anavar, Primobolan, Depot, equipoise, and testosterone. He argues, and perhaps he's actually correct in this particular one. Shutdown is, his name is Vincent Charles 4002. Shutdown is when you don't come back after 3 to 6 months. Suppressive is the work, he means word, you're looking for. Okay, Vince, well, you've made a mistake yourself, but we can ignore that. And it's to do with, as you say, shutdown and suppression. Yeah, listen, Vince, if we'd have spent most of that podcast like grammar Nazis, and I can be a grammar Nazi myself, trust me, Vince, I really can. Arc and the difference. The clue here is the new users. We don't want new users, and for that, we don't even want old users to have shutdown. Equally, if suppression is pretty much what everybody's going to get from day one. If you take a steroid and you're on it for more than a few days, week, 2 weeks, you're going to get some level of suppression. The argument then becomes the suppression is so low of natural production that the steroids you're taking are doing the job, and how long you take to recover, and how long and so on and so forth, right? So shutdown, arguably, is no production. And even that's arguable. So it's semantics, really, honestly. And that's what we're addressing there, semantics. We know people that have been on for a year, 2 years, and then they suddenly decide they want to have children. And what's one of the phrases we used to, you take one swimmer to fertilize an egg, one active swimmer to fertilize an egg. You've probably got something, but it's very, very low down on the scale. That's why you feel like shit and so on and so forth. But almost no production of testosterone, I find that hard to believe. So arguably, semantics would say that it's all suppression. It's just how long you're suppressed and just how badly you're suppressed. So it's more of an argument about the detail and the meaning of the word than it is about the actual podcast, Steve. So there you go. You do the next one.
Well, a lot of people say, shutdown means I have no libido, and it doesn't necessarily mean that. No. There's been people running testosterone who have testosterone levels in the 2000s, 3000s who report bad libido. Like shit. Because so that doesn't mean it's not how you feel. So really, technically, the whole suppression shutdown thing is based on your LH. How good is your pituitary glands function?
Are you producing any reasonable level of testosterone the way that you did before you did the cycle, and how do you feel? I mean, we talk about blood tests and so on and so forth. Like I said, it's a detail of semantics, and that's not what we were addressing in that show. We were talking about reasonable use by newbies and how they're going to feel, and obviously recovering after they've done a stack. That is far, far more important than getting into the minutiae and the detail of the meaning of the word and what suppression and shutdown really, really means. Because we don't want anybody to have shutdown, and we want suppression to be only the length of the cycle and for you all to fully recover. Because that's way, way more important than arguing about the wrestling. I'll do another one. I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
Right. So Evo podcast 372, Trenbolone, Anadrol, and Halo testing for strength. We've covered this a couple of times. I remember these. Comment from Rash. I can't say the rest of it. Marquez 9634. I would love to hear this podcast without earning, I think he means hearing, about their misspelled as well. I love it when they misspell. Overpriced liver support products. Tren, in brackets, A-bombs, and Halo. Please stop trying to sell your BS. Thanks. Listen, guys. Right. So some of our shows are sponsored, which means we have to mention the sponsor's product. There's no getting away from that. Not all of the shows where we mention a product that we found effective personally and that we know other users have found effective personally. And I've even said this when I've said there are similar products, but we've used this product. And the product is talking about, of course, Steve, is N2 Guard. It's not even mentioned here, but that's what it is. So we quite simply said that there's a product out there that we would use on cycle and sometimes before or after cycle, but mostly on cycle to protect our organs that we've personally used, personally tried, personally had experience, and we know how well or how badly, but it's normally how well, Steve, we have used N2 Guard and recovered. Now, again, if it's a sponsored show, we haven't got any fucking choice. We literally are, the show is being paid for by the sponsor and it has to be mentioned. You're not going to sell any products in a sponsored show if you don't mention sponsored products. It just doesn't work like that. And again, we're also talking about, listen, none of us are going to, Steve, are not going to reach out through the internet and grab you by the throat and make you go to the shop or make you buy that product. You can buy other products if you want to. It's just one that we know about, that we're familiar with, that we feel is effective, and that's the reason why we've recommended it. You listen to the show, you do not have to agree with anything that we've said. We actually invite you to put comments in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? That's kind of the nature of the internet. So if he doesn't want to listen to our bullshit, don't listen to the show. Obviously, we prefer that you did. And we don't even mind that you put this comment because it gives us an opportunity to address it. Jump in with another one, Steve.
So the prior one, which was podcast 374 as well, we had a second comment, which I included, and it was by Games Nation 8913. He says, lost me at quote unquote, a quote, you can run Anavar only, unquote. So this is another one of these oral only people that are against oral only cycles. And look, I just came off a T-ball only cycle that I'm finishing up right now. And the reason I did it is because, you know, we're in the holiday season and we're, you know, I want to get into, this is the season for me where I live, because I live in a hot climate where I can do tons of cardio and outdoor cardio. So I want to take advantage of it. So really my steroid go-to is T-ball in this situation and equipoise. So I plan on using equipoise as well during the season, but right now I'm using T-ball and I'm doing T-ball only. And look, I'm in live, I'm doing well. I actually am shocked because I'm doing a lot of core work as well, working my abs and stuff. I'm actually shocked at my body. I might have the best body I've ever had in my life just on T-ball only. So this idea that you can't run oral only steroids or whatever is BS. So at the end of the day, look, I understand if you do Anavar only or T-ball only or any of these oral steroids only, I get it. It's more effective to stack steroids. That is true. More steroids you stack, the more mass, the more strength in theory that you're going to get. But to say that you can't do just an oral only cycle is just dumb. It's more advantageous for me to do T-ball only based on my goals right now. I'm doing core work. I'm sweating my balls off in a hot room, doing some intense core work in a hot room. I'm doing hot yoga. I'm doing jogging outside and sweating in the humidity of the climate I live in. So for me, there's no advantage for me to stack in a bunch of testosterone and have all that water retention and look all, puffy and kill my cardio. So for me, it's advantageous to do it this way. So there's no reason for you to think, why don't you just try it and see for yourself instead of just making the assumption that, I can't do an oral only cycle. Go ahead, Muffin.
Steve, I'll jump in here. I've run multiple anavar only cycles, and I would consider myself arguably an advanced strength athlete. You and I know, I mean, Dylan, great buddy of ours, argues constantly for short periods of time on orals, typically 3 to 4 weeks. I've seen another of our moderators and reps talk about 3 to 4 weeks on orals. And I said, how many times I've run 8 weeks and not had issues, right? So we're arguing about the length of time. And the topic title was the most important thing here. It specifically says new users. So I would never recommend a new user to do a stack. I really wouldn't, because we talk about how you respond to steroids. If you run 3 or 4 or 5 steroids, what was it that gave you the success or lack of success? You don't know. Was it the trend? Was it the test? Was it the sus? Was it the EQ? What was it? Did you respond to all those steroids or one? So we always talk about the experience that you're going to have with steroids, and that comes from, I don't want to try every steroid there is, not ever to Stephen, and I don't think most of our listeners do, but the sensible advice that we would give to a new user would be a single steroid, whether it's an injectable or an oral. And in fact, topic title includes injectables. And so he says, you lost me, you can run anavar only. He's mistaken. I've done it. I've achieved what I set out to achieve. Steve's done it. He's doing it right now. He set out to achieve what he achieves. That means it can be done. It's as simple as that. If the user disagrees, fine. But it can be done. On to the next one, Steve. So, okay, sorry, we've already done that one. I'm going to do right about the comments. Let me scroll down. Okay, Evo Hardcore 125, the Bob Harris steroid cycle. And the listener disagreed with the statistics, and I've checked, and the listener's correct, which is kind of frustrating. So he said, is Kevin Shushinard 9539, born in 1951? No, he was born on December 14th, 1959, 5'10" and weighed 220. No, he was 6 foot and 240. He wasn't into golf. He played it to gain his father's approval of him. Sorry, but if you get the basics wrong, then how can I believe your info on his steroid cycles? You can't. I'll address the first point and the second point, but I'll put it in reverse order. And I actually responded, I believe here, Steve, something to the point of where saying it's a best guess. I can't see that here, but that's the reality, right? Every single time, with one or two exceptions, when we've talked about a professional level bodybuilder, a pro bodybuilder, Olympia level bodybuilder, we haven't had him ring us up and tell us what he's taking or what he took in the past. It is what we think that athlete is taking. And we can guess that from his genetics, from his build-up, sometimes from comments that have been made and been reported on, and also what we know that it takes, and again, other professional bodybuilders. So the argument about what you can believe is our best guess. Now, on the factual information, I'll put my hands up to this one, Steve. We would probably refer it to an article that had been written by someone else on the Evo forums. And unfortunately, that person's made a mistake. For example, the listener's comment is quite correct that he was born December 14th, 1959, because before this show started, I went and looked at Wikipedia, and there it is. So he's correct. And I also now, even looking at the 6 foot comment versus a 5'10" comment, I've got his fucking book here, Steve Gorilla Suit, and I know for a fact he was 6 foot. So I think it was literally that we've had the information in front of us and it was wrong, in which case we put our hands up. The steroid stack is always going to be best guess. Listen, guys, even when a pro bodybuilder sat down and spilled their guts, are they telling the truth? I can tell you what I have taken. Steve can tell you what he's taken. Most professional bodybuilders, sometimes they're contractually obligated not to tell you. A sponsor of the supplement company that's given them a 6-figure contract, I do not want you to be recorded for the time that you're under contract as telling people what you take. So it's always best guess. We have covered where specific stacks have been mentioned, and the two that stick to my mind, Steve, is Dallas McCarver and George Peterson. Dallas McCarver's death cycle was commonly reported multiple places, and George Peterson information came from the fucking autopsy. So there you go on that particular one. Hands up, some of our information wrong, with the rest is best guess.
Yeah.
So onwards for the next one, Steve.
Yeah, and I don't think it's fair to say, sorry, but if you get the basics wrong, then how can I believe your info on steroid cycles? Because as Mobster said, when you're pulling up the statistics on these bodybuilders, you're getting them from other websites and other articles. So if that website or article has him at 240, but he's really 220, or 220 versus 240, I mean, that's kind of like, or 5'10" versus 6 foot. And the whole height and weight thing is, a lot of times Arnold used to lie about his height all the time. Of course, he's going to lie.
That's Steve, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So, I mean, it's a little misleading. And then a lot of bodybuilders lie about their height going less. Like me, I tell people, yeah, I'm only 5'6", because if I tell you that I've only weighed 200 pounds in my life, you're gonna say, oh, 200 pounds, Steve, you're a tiny guy. Well, I'm only 5'5.5", and 5'6".
Which makes me huge.
But if I'm on a dating website, I'm gonna put down I'm 5'8".
Man,
I want the girls to think I'm taller.
Let me address that. Let me jump in on that one before we move on.
So sometimes that can get mixed up. So I mean, I don't think that's
I've been on dating sites, Steve, and the amount of guys that claimed they were 6 foot or under, or the amount of women that wanted the person to be 6 foot or over, was fucking unbelievable. I pulled women, I dated women simply because when I said I was 6'3", I was 6'3". The number of guys that turn up at dates with lifters in their shoes and shit like that. So yeah, bodybuilding is no better, no worse for that. Every fucker's got a 24-inch arm. Come on. So you're dealing with that.
He might be 5'11", or and just put down 6 foot. So
absolutely.
I mean, let's not get into like semantics and like stats and stuff, because that gets. So he could have at some point actually been 5'10" with height, and that got recorded on a particular website. Yep. And you're saying he's 6 foot. Did you know him in person, where you stood next to him and you guys measured each other? He could have had slips in his shoes. Could have been a lot of things. So, I mean, it's being a little semantic. The point was, it was a very good podcast we did. He was the first gay professional athlete to come out. That's a very
great aesthetics, Steve.
So it's a great
fantastic representative for the gay community. Did a lot of political stuff with his boyfriend.
So we're not gonna so don't bash the podcast. At least give us some credit on that, because other podcasts won't do that are more like, backwards and like hate on people.
And we put our hands up if we've made a mistake. Let me do another one, Steve.
Go ahead,
Evo Podcast 318. Arimidex, and I can't pronounce the next word, even it's quite common, with bodybuilding steroids. Scott EACY, but 4103. What the hell is a forum? I've been using, studying, researching anabolic steroids for years. Everyone on YouTube always talks about forums. What the fuck is a forum? Lol. Guy, Scott, you're on the internet. You could have Googled that question, couldn't you, Scott? Come on now. What you're really talking about is that your only source of information has come from, including ours, YouTube videos. And there's a great argument to be made in the same way that Steve mentioned my bodybuilding magazine and book collection. There are very few bodybuilding magazines left because nearly everything is on the internet right now. And forums versus, for example, Reddit, which ironically is still a forum. There are hundreds of thousands of bodybuilding fans and people talking about steroids on Reddit, but it's one of the worst sources for information ever. And you and I are old enough and ugly enough to know some of the forums, Meso, I'm looking at you guys, are crap because it's just a fucking zoo, right? So for you to be able to get solid ass information, including in our podcast, can be difficult. Even professional bodybuilders won't give you the information that you, the listener, need. Now, our forums, the podcast in question, was an evolutionary podcast, which means it's related to the Evo family of forums, evolutionary.org specifically. And we have a forum which still exists. And our forums try, especially Evolutionary, because they were the sponsor of that podcast, that's the one that we did it for, trying to give you solid ass information on a daily basis. Now, how that works is that you come on, Scott, you ask us a question, and fingers crossed, 20 of our members, if not more, come on and offer you solid ass information, either from their experience or from what they read, or even sometimes, bless them, bro science, because that's the kind of way that they've been thinking. But 9 times out of 10, there will be golden nuggets of information in there for you. It still works. Scott, if you went to the gym and you asked one person for a piece of information, you're kind of limiting yourself. If you go around the gym and ask 10 people, hopefully 6 or 7 of them will agree. And that'll be the information that you want. That'll be the reply that you're looking for. That's how forums work. So, Scott, please look it up on the next one. Crack on, Steve. You do one.
All right, so this one was Evolutionary Underground episode 4. So it's one of the earlier ones. He says, Iron Motivation says, I'm literally the only user watching this channel. So in that particular social media platform, there had been 1,400 views. So it was him and about 1,399 other people who had watched the video. But here's the
and
thing.
It's an early one. An early one, Steve.
But here's the thing,
yeah,
like we're
4.
on different platforms. A lot of people
Yes.
think they're on a particular social media site and they think, yeah, this is what everybody uses. And they don't realize that nobody's ever heard of this shit. Like I was literally at a football game and there was a weather delay and I was on a social media app trying to find out the answer. And someone posted when the game would resume. And I showed it to the people in my row. And they're like, oh, I never even heard of that social media site. Well, what is that? So it just shows you that people in their own minds, they think like, okay, because I'm on this particular social media app and this is the one I use all the time, that everyone else uses this. And a lot of people don't even use it. They haven't even heard of it. So, I mean, you got to remember, we're on so many different places and most of our views are right off the website. That's where our members are. And we have tens of thousands of members 24/7 from all over the world who are on our forum listening to the podcast. So we have literally,
there are some listeners that stay that only listen to it when they're
Yeah.
riding the bike at the gym. So they've literally got the SoundCloud version. And not only that, here's a quick one for you. Iron Motivation 984. Don't use the word literally if you don't understand what the word literally means. And I say that nicely because literally means I am the only person. Whereas in reality, as Steve said, if you literally looked at the information on the channel, you would have seen that there was another 1,399 people that was doing it. So obviously you wasn't the only listener. And like Steve said, multiple platforms, including directly through the Evo sites. So obviously that's wrong. Here's another one. Evo Podcast 278, all about testosterone. Hector Rodriguez, I think, 3182. I can't afford blood work because, and I've got the rest is all in capital letters, Steve, but I work at Zacky's farm, okay, hanging chickens 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So he's a hardworking fella. I'm 42 years old, got out of federal prison, big. I'm 5'7", I'm assuming that's what he means, 239 pounds, 19.5-inch arms, 20-inch neck, 50-inch chest, natural. He doesn't mention the size of his belly, so he could be fat, who knows. I gotcha. I think that's what you're saying. Guy at the gym said he can get me all the gear. I pay full rent, live by myself. But like I said, no money on blood work. Let me address this one, Steve. We've actually had a conversation or two on the forums, specifically this. So Hector, your buddy at the gym that you're going to buy the steroids from, quote unquote, your source. And again, we would prefer you to use an approved source because they tend to have more availability, better bandwidth of products and so on and so forth. It's a much better idea. And of course, if you're going to come on the forum or the channels, support our sponsors, support the companies that support us and allow the forums and the information to be given out in the first place. That's how that works. You're buying from them, enables us to put out these shows. So that's super, super important. Okay, he says, I pay full rent to live by myself. Okay, save up. Do the stack, whatever the stack is going to be, regardless of your statistics and how hard you work at the chicken factory, do it properly. That means, for example, buy a product like N2Guard for on-cycle support, making sure you've got all the products in place for your PCT. It doesn't mean, for example, and this is what maybe you're inferring, Hector, that you're going to go out and I can just about afford to run this stack. Then wait, save up a few more dollars, do another couple of extra days at the chicken factory. All joking aside, get the money together. Because I cannot, we've actually said this, Steve, if you can afford to put down $500 to $1,000, on a steroid stack, then you can afford another $100 rent you got, and you can afford another $100 or $200 because it's only going to take another couple of weeks from your disposable income to get your PCT. And then when everything's in place, Hector, run that stack. Come on the forums and we will help you. If there's money off tokens, vouchers or sales, we'll direct you towards that thing. We'll actually try to get it for you less than maybe you're paying your buddy, and get it together and tell you how to run the cycle so you get the best goddamn results. So yeah, that's in a nice way. Steve is not actually being that negative, but he talks about the blood work. Steve has a link in his signature on the forums to where you can get a discounted blood work test done, and they cost less than people think they are. It used to be a lot more money back in the day. Relative to that, the price has actually gone down, and that's allowing for inflation and everything else. So again, it's one of those things. It's actually more difficult for me here in the UK than it is in the US. And if Hector's working at Zaki Farms, I guess it's the US, it's actually cheaper than you think, Hector. And if you can afford the stack and the PCT and the on-cycle support, you can definitely afford at least one blood test. So on that one particular, Steve, jump on the next one, please.
433 stacking T-ball and Dianabol and testosterone with Anavar. Iron Motivation says, please design me a Sustanon cycle, 250 milligrams per week. How much Erminix and how often? Thanks. Someone else responds, you're going to fail so hard, laughing my ass off. Then another person responds, my thoughts exactly, but I only know that because I was once that guy. So Mobster, what are your thoughts on this one?
I've seen a couple of these on the forum, Steve, and I'll tell you what it is, right? Steve does a consult, and we try to help. When Steve does a consult, he's going to ask for every single piece of information about you that you could possibly have. He's going to sit down and work out what's about your lifestyle, what about nutrition, what can you eat, what can't you eat, what things are available to you, how do you train, and all these kind of stuff. Now, we cannot do that in like a random sentence that's been posted in a comment on YouTube. We just can't. Literally, there is nothing about you whatsoever. Iron Motivation 984. How old are you? How tall are you? Are you fat? Are you thin? Have you trained for more than 10 minutes? There's nothing. So for us to be able to write you out a program is like Steve doing a consult blind. Literally, my name's John, Steve. Can you write me? Can you? No, I don't know. John, are you male or female? Old or young? There's so much pieces of information that's missing. It's impossible. And it would be completely irresponsible for us if we responded to this question to literally write down, say, an 8 or 10 or 12 or 16-week program, a stack or a cycle with zero information from you. This is why we almost insist, Steve, that you run a log on the forum, because we can see photographs, we can guesstimate your body fat. We've had teenagers come on in, we've had to turn them away because we realized how young they are. We've had people of a certain age that should wait another couple of years. We've had people that have been training for 3 months, 6 months, or a year, and we say, come on, get 2 years. You've barely got your nutrition under control. You've had success stories where they've dropped 50 pounds. The more information that we get, the better. We cannot, and it'd be irresponsible for us to do so. And we see this sometimes on other places where they do this. And even occasionally, I've pulled a rep up and said, listen, you haven't even asked this or you haven't asked that, and you're writing out a program. It doesn't make any sense. If any of you coach clients as a PT or do consults like Steve or try to offer information like myself, the more we know about you, the better. So no, we cannot write you out a program. And Christ, you've practically done it yourself when you say SUS 250 cycle 250 milligrams a week. Well, it's SUS, so you'd inject twice a week, Steve. I mean, how much more complicated do you want? Even your Imidex, we've talked about this on both shows and on the forums where we talk about start at this amount, and if you see any signs up it to this amount. Again, we don't know you, we don't know what your symptoms are, we don't know any statistics about you, can't do that for you. And we'd encourage you to come on the forums, and then we can ask these kind of questions to get that kind of information. The other comments, they're kind of accurate because we don't know what the nutrition's like, we don't know what the trainer's like, we have no idea how old this person is. It's like me guessing the lottery numbers, Steve. I might as well ask for a lucky dip.
My view, just be, guys, be a little nicer. I mean, look, at the end of the day, remember in school, like some kids needed a special attention from the teacher. They learned a little differently. Some people need to be more spoon-fed. Some people can pick up stuff a lot quicker. We all learn differently. So if you want to be spoon-fed, like the Mobster said, just come to me. Let's do a one-on-one consult. Yes, I charge a fee, but it's a very fair fee compared to some of the other jokers out there. And I can spoon feed you and really help you get on with it. But otherwise, come on the forum and start a thread, start a log, and we can guide you on that one for sure. So I'm gonna do one, and Mobster, you do the last one on Milos, because I know you like Milos, you know a lot about him.
Yeah.
But let me do this one really quick and comment in it. This was episode 326 on albuterol, and he company email says it's not even close to clenbuterol. You guys should leave this to doctors because you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So listen, dude, my friend, I've used I've used albuterol. Albuterol is in fact like clenbuterol if you use albuterol at a higher dosage, which is going to be necessary in a lot of cases to yield the type of fat loss results that you're looking for. So for me, when I ran albuterol, I had to raise the dosage up to the point where it was very similar to clen. I got the same side effects, the elevated heart rate, the shaky hands, the heartburn, the headaches, the killing my cardio, and all this stuff. So it is the same thing as clen. But if you take it milligram for milligram, yes, clen is much more powerful. But albuterol is the same fucking drug. They're both designed for the same thing. They're both exactly going to give you the same results if you use albuterol at a certain dosage. So I disagree with you, my man. That's just not true. I've used them both, and I know how these drugs work. So, all right, Mobster, comment on the last one, which comes from Hardcore episode 115, the Milos Sarsev steroid cycle, and Keith Lilly. And why don't you do what he says and address this? Go ahead.
So he says, okay, who are the guys talking, he means, on the podcast? I saw Milos and was hoping he was on it. I thought like they actually knew Milos firsthand, but it sounded so amateur. I thought, no way. Maybe these Milos to get more views. They definitely don't see eye to eye with him, but I have no clue what this guy's credentials are. Milos is an accomplished bodybuilder, trainer, coach, and nutritionist. These guys sounded so pathetic. Once subscribed here and found this podcast to really suck. Okay, Keith, you didn't ask, so you didn't stick around, so you don't know. I've been doing this shit for 43 years. I'm guessing, and I think I'm probably wrong, Steve, that Steve's been doing it for 20 years. I've competed, I've won this, I've won that, I've still got records, and so on and so forth. I can string 3 words together, and I understand the meaning of words, and I can do research. I am familiar, for example, with Milos. Now, Milos, you mentioned one of his points, and I'm going to cover this specifically, is an accomplished bodybuilder, trainer, coach, and nutritionist. Yes, he is. But then so are other people. And I've seen shows. Just yesterday he did a show. It's got Chris Cormier, 2 other bodybuilders who escaped me for the minute, will come to me in a moment. And Chris is doing what Milos does. And they're talking about Nexilla, the latest phenom. And Chris is working with Nexilla. That's his nickname. I can't remember the athlete's actual name. Now, Milos is very good at butting in, etc., etc. But Chris is working with this athlete. Milos is working with Samson. And their approaches will be different. That's the reason why sometimes an athlete will go from Milos to someone else. George Ferrer is another example. I can think of another couple right now, Steve. And they will have different protocols and different opinions and different ways of training. You mentioned something else. I think we were talking about pro cards just on a previous show that we've not long recorded. And I'm thinking of one particular coach who preps athletes for competition who has never, to the best of my knowledge, won a big competition. And yet he has female and male, 7 at least, it might be actually more, Olympia class winning athletes, including Mr. Olympias, that he's worked with and who have won competitions, including just recently Hadi as an Olympia winner, although he just lost, Derek Lunsford, who won, and the fella that does the classic physique. The names are not tripping off the end of my tongue today. The long and the short of it is, they all differ in their approaches. For example, Milos was a great one for insulin protocols, and Dave Palumbo is a great one for insulin protocols, but it's not the same protocol. So what you're talking about It's a Milos Sarsev steroid cycle. It wasn't going to have Milos come on the show and discuss his steroid cycle. Again, it's our best guess. We don't see eye to eye with him. Yes, that's absolutely true. And any person, including me and Steve, can put out a YouTube video talking about what we think Milos did with a steroid cycle without Milos needing to be there. That's perfectly fine. That's the reason for the freedom of speech. That's the reason for certain protocols and rules and regulations that you have on YouTube, which we abide by. Is he an accomplished bodybuilder? Yes. Is he a great trainer? Yes. Is he a great coach? Yes. Doesn't mean that we agree with him. Doesn't mean he's the best coach ever. No, doesn't mean that Steve is. Doesn't mean that I am. Doesn't mean that you are, Keith. It's just our opinion. In fact, we say that at the end of every show, Steve. Literally what we are doing is a matter of our opinion, the factual information that we can find, and our best guess. And like I said, I've seen a bunch of stuff. I'm probably twice Keith's age, and I'm familiar, for example, with just how many times Milos competed, just how many times he's discussed, for example, his insulin protocol, what he did with bodybuilders, with giant sets. I just discussed that the other day on the forums and so on and so forth. And he has literally sat on shows like the one we're doing right now and disagreed with another coach and disagreed with who's going to win a competition. That makes it interesting. That's life. You don't have to agree with what we've done, but you did listen to it, for which we give you our gratitude. And listen, Keith, post comments, tell us what you disagreed with, and we'll address them. Do a show of your own. Put a video out there what you think Milos is doing, and we'll come on and we'll make comments.
We didn't spend that show just disagreeing with Milos as well. Milos is part of our team indirectly because one of the approved sources that he works for is one that we support, on the forums. So we indirectly part of the same thing. So we're not against Milos, and he's not against us.
No, on the insulin protocol, Steve, some of the stuff that he was doing was leading edge, which meant there was only 2 or 3 people out there that were studying the protocol and trying to use this.
But like you said, he didn't mention exactly what he was talking about in this comment. So I don't even know what he's talking about. Because we didn't do the podcast, it wasn't like a bash Milos podcast.
I think he needed our credentials. I think he needed us to be of the level that he thinks Milos is at and compare us against him and say,
I don't know. Maybe we disagree with Milos on a steroid dosage or something with nutrition or something, and then he took that to mean we couldn't believe this with Milos, and it's just not the case. So Milos is a good guy.
Let me give you an example, Steve. Let me give you an example, right? Now, I've talked about how leading edge he was with the insulin. I've talked about some of the experimentation he'd done. I've mentioned this on the forums recently. They were using, I think, a version of applesauce. They would deplete literally by doing giant sets. I think there's a Japanese bodybuilder that he worked with especially, but a bunch of others as a team worked their asses off doing giant sets to deplete themselves deliberately, and then they were carb loaded with this applesauce. It's one of the things he was experimenting at the time, and it was part of the insulin protocol. Now, absolutely out there on the leading edge trying to get this stuff done. One of the first people to use it himself in this scientific way, because it had been used before, but to get the best from it. The applesauce was a particular brand. I think Chad Nichols was doing something where he actually had to buy this stuff and they stopped making it. So they had to get a company to make a version. That's how out there and on the leading edge of this stuff is, right? So he might not know us and what we do and whatever else. And as I said, I could talk about feats of strength that Steve's done. I could talk about competitions that I've won, the way that I've had stuff published and so on and so forth. It's not a cock measuring competition. If we're not for example, and Steve actually discussed this as well, you do not have to be, and we did this on the pro card thing just now, Stephen, and they didn't show that we recorded. Just because you are a top level bodybuilder does not mean that you know what you're talking about. Sometimes your genetics are so fucking goddamn great that your physique is amazing in spite of your piss poor training and your piss poor knowledge and your lack of knowledge about PEDs. Some of the best coaches, as I've just discussed, do not have the best physiques or haven't won a big competition, but they're great coaches. Steve talked about that earlier in his show. You don't need to necessarily be a contest winning bodybuilder that stood on stage in order to be able to talk about a subject. Now, of course, it helps for people like Keith if you are. And I'll admit, Keith, if I'm a big motherfucker, then you're more likely to pay attention to what I'm saying than a small motherfucker. If I'm a contest-winning bodybuilder, it's the same. I get it, Keith. But at the same time, this is information that's out there from other YouTube videos, from the magazines and books and interviews that Milos has done And so when we talk about his steroid stack, it's from that kind of information. And Milos is probably more open about that than pretty much every professional bodybuilder, because he's not only working with athletes and discussing the protocols that he's working with them for, but also his own experience. And that's where that information comes from. So if it's a question of not recognizing us, that's fine. Us sounding pathetic, again, you're entitled to your opinion. I don't know necessarily what you wanted from the show. Maybe you had an idea about what it was going to be like, and it wasn't what you thought it was going to be like. The other listeners, the hundreds, if not thousands of listeners that paid attention to that show across that platform and all the other platforms, the tens of thousands across the other platforms, it's been out there disagreeing because it got the hits, because people have listened to it, and we can see that from the data and the metrics, etc., etc.
So really quick, So really quick, one last one, and they just left a bunch of emojis. It's from Turbo D, and it was in the episode 321, steroids for men over 50.
Yeah, I can see the emojis, Steve. I can see the
Yeah,
emojis.
he leaves an emoji, a thumbs down, a hand over the face, whatever.
Rolling eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And he leaves 4 negative emojis. He didn't even comment on what he didn't like or anything. This one hurt me, Mobster. This one hurt me a lot.
That's because you're not 50. Listen, listeners, I'm 59 as we record this show. Here's a thing that sometimes happens, right? We understand that testosterone drops off pretty much once you hit 30, 70 when you hit 40. I think it's 30 onwards, Steve, 1% a fucking year. And that's because cavemen never lived that long. 35 was a good age when he was a caveman. So in reality, pollution, poor diet, crappy lifestyles, etc., and nature means your testosterone drops off. However, we get people going, I'm 27, what stack should I do? I'm 33, what stack should I do? It doesn't differ because you're 27 or 33. I'm 59. The stacks that I take at 59 do not differ from when I was 37, from when I first started using. They don't. All right? I'm still big. I still train. I still do this. I still do that. It's the fucking same. If my age was making that much of an impact, then the stack that I do when I'm 50 plus might be different. And here's the thing, and here's the reality. What you want when you're 50 differs from what you want when you're 30. And I think that might be what we're looking at here, Steve. When you are a younger listener, 24, 25, 26, coming to steroids, wanting to be the next Mr. Olympia, your attitude will 100% be different 10, 20, 30 years down the road. It is. You've got grandkids now, motherfucker. You nearly paid off your mortgage. That car you've always dreamed of is now within reach. But you don't want to be Mr. Olympia anymore. So it might well be, Steve, because it was a podcast aimed at the 50-year-old man. And most of
it could have been like a 20-year-old guy, and he was just like, But one day you're going to be that
training. Most people that come to training, Steve, and I'll say this because I've touched on this statistic before we finish the show. So here's the reality, right? If you're a supplement company owner or gym owner or whatever else, and you are looking at your demographic, the average age of the person that trains is between 18 and 25. You typically train 3 to 6 months at the most, normally 3 months, Steve. If a company or myself as a client, coach, whatever, can keep you for more than 3 months, I'm doing well. If I can get you 2 years, I've probably got you for life. You're probably going to live for life or exercise for life, right? So that's the demographic, 18 to 25. The reality is, in terms of disposable income, I want you 25 plus, because you're going to have more money to spend on my product, and so on and so forth. So the podcasts are the same. The majority of our listeners will be younger. They won't be 50 plus. So the 50 plus podcast is aimed realistically at those people that are going to be 50, those people that still want to be training when they're 50, and those that are 50. So it's not necessarily going to be popular with the majority of listeners just based on the age of our typical listener. So I can see the face palm thing and figure out, why did you do one on a 50-year-old? Because, motherfucker, we exist. I'm quoting that line. We exist. Vegans that eat meat, we exist. 50-year-old or 50 plus, like myself, people that train and use steroids exist. And your aspirations is, listen, right, guys, it's going to change. We love comments, including the negative comments, because it gives us the opportunity to address them. So, hey, bring your haterade, we'll have a taste, and we'll sweeten it, hopefully. Look, bottom line is feedback from you is super important, good, bad, or indifferent. We want to know what you're thinking. It will shape podcasts for the future. We will have shows like this, and we will do shows specifically when we talk about why we've done a show for 40-year-old or 50-year-old, because that's not a big percentage of our listeners, it is still a percentage. Please note, we are not doctors and opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.